The microphone feedback cuts through the reception hall like a struck glass. My mother is holding it 2 inches from her mouth, her knuckles white around the base, and the string quartet has already stopped playing because the cellist saw her coming. 212 guests turn in their chairs. My husband's hand, which had been resting warm on my lower back, goes still. Not clenched. Just still, the way a held breath is still. I just think, my mother says, and the speakers throw her voice into every corner of the room, that people deserve to know who they're really applauding tonight. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, a folding chair sits empty. Cane bottom, oak frame, the varnish worn pale on the armrests from 81 years of hands. Nobody's sitting in it. Nobody's supposed to. I asked the caterer to leave it there, at the edge of the room, facing the head table, and not one person at this wedding has asked me why. My mother raises the microphone another inch. Because my daughter, she says, is a liar. I want you to sit with that image for a second. The empty chair, the raised microphone, 212 people holding their forks in the air. Because everything that happens next only makes sense once you understand what that chair means, and why my mother was about to become the last person in that room to find out. Welcome back to Calm Revenge Tales, where we tell the stories of quiet people who got loud exactly once, and made it count. If you're new here, we tell these slow, no shouting, no cheap twists, just the truth arriving on schedule. If that's your kind of story, subscribe now, because by the end of this one you'll understand why some inheritances aren't written in dollars. Now let's go back to where this really started. My name is Josette Deschamps, and before I was anybody's bride I was a marine electrician with a solo LLC, and a 2009 Ford F-250 with 340,000 miles on it. I wired bilge pumps and rewound alternators for shrimp boats out of Beulah Battery, Alabama, and I built that business from nothing. No bank loan, no family money, just a marine electrical certificate from Coastal Alabama Community College, and a willingness to climb into engine rooms that smelled like diesel and low tide at 6 in the morning. By the time I was 29, I had 4 employees and a waiting list. I built all of it without my mother's help, because my mother had already spent her help on other things. A beach condo in Orange Beach, a lease Cadillac Escalade, a second husband named Chip Pruitt who owned 4 car dealerships and one enormous ego. What my mother did give me, unintentionally, was my grandmother. Odile Deschamps was 81 years old, 4'11", and had raised me from age 6 to 17 in a shotgun house on Wintsell Avenue while my mother chased Chip's money 2 counties over. Odile taught me to solder a wire joint before I could parallel park. She taught me to make a roux without burning it, to balance a checkbook to the penny, and to never, under any circumstances, let a man finish a sentence for me. My mother's family called her Mima when they wanted something from her, and that old woman when they didn't. I never called her anything but Grandma Odile, and I made sure everyone at every job site knew exactly whose granddaughter I was. The contrast wasn't subtle. At Sunday dinners, my mother's side set a full table for 11 and a folding chair on the porch for Odile. Because she likes the fresh air, they said every single time, as if she'd never once complained about the mosquitoes. I always carried my plate out to the porch and ate beside her. Chip's family called that sweet. I called it the only correct choice available. The invitation came in March, 4 months before my wedding, in the form of a phone call from my mother that started with congratulations and ended with conditions. She wanted to host the rehearsal dinner. She wanted the wedding photos to include the whole family properly, by which she meant Chip's side, the dealership people, the second cousins who'd call me by the wrong name all evening. And she wanted, she said, for everyone's comfort, for Grandma Odile to sit at the back, near the kitchen, so she's not overwhelmed by all the noise. Odile was sharper at 81 than most people I know at 50. She did the crossword in 9 minutes flat, and could recite every ingredient in a jambalaya from memory, proportions included. She was not overwhelmed by noise. She was inconvenient to look at in the photographs my mother wanted to send to the dealership Christmas card list. I said yes to the wedding my mother wanted to host pieces of, because Odile wanted to see me married in the same church where she'd been married 60 years earlier. And because some things matter more than winning an argument in March that you can win properly in July. Desmond, my fiancé, a maritime attorney with the kind of patience that makes courtrooms go quiet, held my hand through that call and said only, "We'll seat her wherever you want. It's your wedding." He didn't know yet how literally I'd take that. The irony, which I didn't clock at the time, was this. My mother spent that entire call worried about how Odile would look in photographs. She never once asked what Odile had. Only what Odile might embarrass. She had no idea there was anything to find. The rehearsal dinner was at the Pruitt family's lake house, and it went sideways over gumbo. Odile had asked, quietly, if she could bring a pot of her own gumbo instead of eating the catered shrimp cocktail spread, because shellfish gave her hives and nobody had thought to ask. My mother said fine, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite, and then spent 45 minutes loudly explaining to Chip's sister that some people just can't adapt to a nicer way of doing things. Odile set her pot on the counter anyway. She'd made it the way she'd made it for 60 years, dark roux file powder, and dewy from the butcher on Highway 90, and it disappeared faster than anything the caterer brought. Chip's brother-in-law asked for the recipe twice. My mother heard him ask, and her jaw did a thing I'd seen before, a small tightening at the hinge, right before she says something she'll later call just being honest. "Careful," she told him, loud enough for the room. "Mama's cooking's got a lot of salt in it. Doctor's been telling her to watch her sodium for her heart." She smiled while she said it. Odile's hands, resting on the edge of the counter, went very still. There was no doctor. There was no heart condition. My mother invented an ailment for her own mother, in front of 30 people, to explain away a compliment she couldn't stand to let land. I watched Odile's face. She didn't argue. She picked up a dish towel and dried a bowl that was already dry, and said, to no one in particular, "I've made this same pot every Thanksgiving since 1974. Nobody's heart's ever complained yet." 3 of Chip's cousins laughed. My mother did not. That was the first crack, and nobody but me and Desmond seemed to notice it had happened at all. The wedding itself was on July the 18th, at St. Margaret's in Bayou La Batterie, followed by a reception at the Fowl River Pavilion my mother had insisted on upgrading to the good tent, the one with the chandelier inserts. 212 guests. An open bar Chip was paying for, which he mentioned 4 separate times. I'd sat Odile at the second table, front and center, beside Desmond's aunt from Biloxi who made her laugh so hard she had to set down her fork. My mother had tried, twice, to have the seating chart adjusted by the coordinator, and twice I'd overruled it myself in writing, with my own signature on the final chart. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Dinner was blackened redfish with a Creole cream reduction. A dish I'd chosen because Odile had taught me the base sauce when I was 9 years old, standing on a step stool at her stove. Halfway through the entree, my mother stood up from the head table, walked to the DJ booth, and asked for the microphone. I thought it was a toast. Chip thought it was a toast. Half the room raised their glasses before she'd said a word. "I just think," she began, "and I've already told you the rest of that line, the one about liars, the one that stopped the cellist mid-bow. What I hadn't told you yet is what came after. My daughter," my mother said, "has spent the last 2 years telling people I neglected her grandmother. Telling people I don't call, I don't visit, I don't care. And I have sat here quiet about it for 2 years because I didn't want to make a scene at my own daughter's engagement, at her shower, at her rehearsal dinner. But I am done being quiet. Josette is a liar. And if she's willing to lie about her own mother to make herself look like some kind of saint, I want everybody in this tent to know what kind of person they just watched get married." Nobody moved. A waiter froze mid-pour, wine bottle tipped, a red thread of it landing on the white tablecloth and spreading like something opening. Odile stood up. 81 years old, 4'11", in a lavender dress she'd bought on layaway at the Belkin Mobile. She didn't reach for a microphone. She didn't need one. "Genevieve," she said, my mother's given name, rarely used, always a warning. "You called me twice in 2 years. Both times you needed something signed." My mother's face went through 3 colors in under 2 seconds. That's not, Mama, sit down, you don't understand what's happening. I understand exactly what's happening, Odile said. You're standing in a $5,000 tent your husband's dealership money paid for, calling your granddaughter a liar in front of 200 people, because she's the only one who ever drove 40 minutes each way to bring me groceries and never once asked me to sign anything in return. Chip's face had gone the specific gray of a man calculating what this was about to cost him socially. Nobody at the Pruitt tables was laughing anymore. You are not, my mother said, voice climbing, going to stand there and make me the villain at my own daughter's wedding. I'm not making you anything, Odile said. You did that yourself a long time before tonight. That was when my mother reached out, not violently, but fast, a grab more than a push, and closed her hand around Odile's upper arm to pull her back down into her chair. Hard enough that Odile's chair rocked on 2 legs and the water glass in front of her tipped and shattered on the pavilion floor. The room made a sound I can only describe as everyone inhaling at once. Chip stood up. For 1 second I thought he might actually say something. His mouth opened, his hand half lifted toward his wife's shoulder, and then he sat back down and picked up his glass instead. And I understood that whatever Chip was going to be in this family, it wasn't going to be brave. I was already moving. Desmond was already moving. We reached the table at the same time, and I put myself between my mother's hand and my grandmother's arm before either of us said a word. Take your hand off her, I said. Not loud. I didn't need to be loud. The tent had gone silent enough that a whisper would have carried. Josette, this doesn't concern you. She's my grandmother. Everything about her concerns me. I helped Odile stand, steadied her, felt her hand grip my forearm, small and strong, the same grip that used to hold mine crossing Wentzell Avenue. My mother, red-faced now, gestured at the whole tent like she was presenting evidence. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This performance. You'd rather humiliate your own mother at your own wedding than admit. You're right, I said. This is a wedding. And you just assaulted an 81-year-old woman at it, in front of 200 witnesses, because she corrected you. I turned to my mother's side of the family, to Chip, to the dealership people, to the cousins who'd call me by the wrong name later that night in cards I'd never open. Anyone who thinks that was acceptable, stay. Everyone else, the exits are behind you. We're leaving. Grandma Odile is coming with me. She is not, my mother snapped. This is her family's event, she doesn't get to just. She's not leaving because she's being punished, I said, and I want you to hear that I said this clearly, at full volume, so there'd be no confusion about it later. She's leaving because I'm choosing her. That's different than being thrown out. I want everyone here to understand that difference. I heard, from somewhere near the Pruitt tables, one of Chip's nieces say, quiet, almost to herself, somebody should say something. Nobody did. She didn't either. The moment closed over like water. Desmond took off his suit jacket and put it around Odile's shoulders, because the tent had emptied enough that the river wind was coming through, and he offered her his arm, and the 3 of us walked out of my own wedding reception past 212 people who had watched the whole thing happen, and moved not one muscle to stop it. We didn't go back for the cake. I found out 3 weeks later that my mother served it anyway. I want to tell you the marriage started with a honeymoon. It started with a folding cot in my grandmother's guest room and a stack of medical bills, because 2 days after the wedding, Odile's blood pressure spiked hard enough to land her in Mobile General for 4 nights of observation. And my mother, informed by 3 separate phone calls, never once picked up. Desmond and I postponed the honeymoon without discussing it. There was nothing to discuss. He rescheduled 2 depositions and I handed my crew lead the keys to 2 open jobs. And for 11 days we lived on hospital coffee and the particular exhaustion of loving someone whose body is quietly negotiating with time. When Odile came home, she couldn't come home to Wentzell Avenue anymore. The front steps had gotten too much for her, and the nearest neighbor who used to check on her had moved to Pensacola in the spring. So she came home with us, to the 1 bedroom above my shop that Desmond and I had been slowly turning into a real house, And I turned my home office into her bedroom in a single weekend, buying a bed frame low enough for her to get in and out of safely and a grab bar for the shower that cost $68 and took me 40 minutes to install correctly twice, because the studs weren't where the stud finder said they'd be. We didn't complain about any of it, and I want to be specific about what any of it cost, because vague sacrifice doesn't mean anything. Her blood pressure medication ran $43 a month after insurance. Her cardiologist in Mobile was a 40-minute drive each way, every 6 weeks, which meant blocking off half a workday I couldn't always bill for. Her hearing aid battery, size 13, cost $11 for a 6-pack, and she went through one every 11 days. None of this bankrupted us. All of it added up, the way water finds every seam in a boat you thought was sealed. I didn't count it as a burden. I counted it as arithmetic, the same way I counted amp draw on a wiring job. A fact to be planned around, not mourned. My mother called twice that first month. The first time, she wanted to know if Odile still had the deed to the Winsell Avenue lot, because with property taxes what they are, it might be smarter for Mama to just deed it over to me now, avoid probate later, you understand. The second call came 2 weeks after that, and this one came with an offer. She'd help with Odile's medical bills. She even named a figure, $2,000. If I'd agree to bring Odile back to family Thanksgiving properly, like nothing happened. And if Odile would sign a general power of attorney over to her, just for convenience, Josette, so somebody responsible is handling things. I said no to both calls. Not out of spite, because responsible was not a word I was willing to let my mother borrow. What my mother didn't know, what none of us fully knew yet, not even me, was that Odile had, months before any of this, taken a rideshare to a lawyer's office in downtown Mobile on a Tuesday, I thought she'd spent at the library, and had come home that afternoon with a manila folder she wouldn't discuss, and a small tin fig preserve can, dented at one corner, which she kept on her nightstand and would not let anyone else touch. I'd seen that Kim before, on the counter at Winsell Avenue, holding loose buttons and a few dollars in quarters. It looked different now. Heavier, somehow, though I never picked it up to check. I asked her once, refilling her water glass, what was in it. She just patted my hand and said, "Things that'll matter when they need to matter, and not 1 minute before." I let it go. You learn, with people like Odile, that patience is a kind of respect. There was a Tuesday in September I think about often. Odile had a good day, steady hands, clear color, and she asked me to help her make pain Perdue, the New Orleans-style French toast her own mother had taught her during the Depression, made from bread too stale to eat any other way, soaked in a custard heavy with vanilla, and just enough cinnamon to make the kitchen smell like a memory instead of a room. We made it at 9 at night, an odd hour for breakfast food, powdered sugar dusting the counter like a light frost, and Desmond came home from a late deposition to find the two of us eating it standing at the stove, laughing about nothing in particular. Odile put her hand on my cheek, floury, and said, "This is what a Tuesday is supposed to feel like." I didn't know yet that we didn't have very many Tuesdays left. If you're feeling the weight of this part of the story, the hospital coffee, the grab bars, the folding money for a family that never called, I want you to sit with it for one more moment before we keep going, because what happens next is the reason this story exists. Subscribe now, so the rest of it finds you, because the woman in that tin can was never just saving buttons. The fall brought 2 more calls from my mother, both refused the same way as the first, and one visit from Chip alone unannounced, standing on my porch in a golf shirt with an offer that came dressed as concern. He'd personally cover a private aid, 40 hours a week, if I agreed to let Odile move into a nice facility, closer to your mama, so this whole thing can heal properly. I told him the same thing I'd told my mother. Odile wasn't a wound that needed healing somewhere else. She was a person who needed a home, and she already had one with me. Chip's mouth did something complicated on his way back to his truck. Not quite shame, not quite relief, something in between. The look of a man who knew he'd offered the minimum and gotten away with it. I noticed it. I didn't say anything about it. Some moments of weakness in other people aren't yours to spend. By November, Odile's heart had started skipping in a way her cardiologist didn't love. And by the second week of December, for months and 11 days after my wedding, she died in her sleep in the low bed I'd installed myself, in the room that used to be my office, with Desmond's mother's quilt over her legs because she always said the air conditioning ran too cold. I found her in the morning with the tin can already sitting on top of the manila folder on her nightstand, like she'd set them there together on purpose, the night before, though I'll never know for certain if she felt it coming. I called Desmond. I called the funeral home on Craft Highway. I did not call my mother for 6 hours, because I needed those 6 hours to just sit with her first, before the rest of the world got a vote in how this went. The funeral was small, 40 people, most of them from the church on Wintsell Avenue, a handful of my old job site crew, who'd met her exactly once, and never forgot the gumbo. My mother came. She wore black and cried loudly at the graveside, the kind of crying that turns heads, that asks to be witnessed. I watched her and felt nothing sharper than tired. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from an estate attorney named Rosalind Chastain, whose office was 3 doors down from the lawyer Odile had visited that Tuesday in the spring. She asked Desmond and me to come in, and asked, specifically, that my mother and Chip be present too. My mother assumed it was about the Wintsell Avenue house, a modest, unremarkable lot she'd been circling for 2 years like a buzzard over a carcass. She showed up dressed like she was attending a business meeting she expected to win. Rosalind Chastain's office had a long conference table and a window that looked out over Government Street, and she waited until all 6 of us, me, Desmond, my mother, Chip, and Rosalind's paralegal taking notes, were seated before she opened the folder. Odile Deschamps came to see me in April, Rosalind said, 6 months before her passing, of her own volition, without prompting from anyone in this room, and underwent a full cognitive evaluation with Dr. Priya Nair at Spring Hill Medical Center specifically, so that no one could later claim she wasn't of sound mind. That evaluation is attached as Exhibit A. She scored 29 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. My mother's hands, folded on the table, went still. She came to me, Rosalind continued, because she'd learned through a friend at her church that a family member had attempted to obtain guardianship paperwork on a different elderly parishioner earlier that year, without that parishioner's knowledge, using a doctor who'd never actually examined them. She wanted to make sure that could never happen to her. My mother's mouth opened. I don't know what she's talking about, I never. Genevieve, Rosalind said, not unkindly, the guardianship petition you filed with Mobile County Probate Court in October, 3 weeks after your daughter's wedding, is a public record. I have a copy. She slid a single page across the table. My mother's own signature sat at the bottom of it, dated 3 weeks after she'd grabbed a microphone and called me a liar in front of 200 people. She'd been building a case to take control of her own mother's finances the entire time. She was pretending the fight had only ever been about Thanksgiving seating. Chip's face had gone the color of old drywall. Jen, you told me you said that was just paperwork in case. Shut up, Chip, my mother said, and her voice cracked on the second word, the first real crack I'd heard in it in years. Rosalind opened a second folder. Because of that petition, which the court dismissed in November on the strength of Dr. Nair's evaluation, Odile accelerated a plan she'd already begun. In 2019, she used $41,000 of settlement money from a wrongful death claim tied to her late husband's workplace accident to purchase 2 acres of undeveloped waterfront land on the Fowl River, adjacent to what is now the Fowl River Marina expansion. That land was appraised as of last month at $310,000 due to the marina project and a rezoning that went through in August. The room did not make a sound. My mother's mouth had opened again and produced nothing. She placed that land, along with the remaining balance of the settlement, $62,000, held in a trust account at Hancock Whitney, into a revocable trust in April, naming Josette Marie Deschamps as sole trustee and sole beneficiary. She also left a letter, to be read at the reading of this trust, which she asked me to read aloud to whoever was present. Rosalind reached into the folder and, from beneath the paperwork, lifted out a small, dented tin fig preserve can. She set it on the table between us. I recognized it instantly. The same can from Odil's nightstand. The one I'd never been allowed to touch. Rosalind opened it and drew out a single folded letter, and beneath that, a roll of cash, $340 in worn 20s and 10s, with a note rubber banded around it that said, in Odil's handwriting, "For the wedding cake we never got to eat. Buy yourselves a good one." The letter, Rosalind read aloud, said this: "To whoever is sitting at this table hearing this, if my daughter is one of them, I want her to know I'm not doing this to punish her. I'm doing it because Josette drove 40 minutes each way for groceries and never once asked me to sign anything in return, and that is the only accounting that has ever mattered to me. I kept this can on my nightstand so nobody would think to look for anything valuable in it. People only search where they expect treasure. That was always the safest place I owned." My mother made a sound then that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a word. Something caught between both, and put both hands over her face. Whether it was grief for her mother or grief for the money, I genuinely couldn't tell you, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to decide which. Chip stared at the appraisal figure like it had personally betrayed him, which in its own quiet way, it had. "There's one more line," Rosalind said, "and read it. Tell Genevieve I forgave her a long time before tonight. Forgiving somebody isn't the same as handing them the keys." I sat with that for a second. My grandmother's own words, echoed back in the exact structure of what I'd said to my mother in that tent. Though Odile had written this letter in April, for months before the wedding had even happened, before my mother had ever raised a microphone, before any of us knew what shape this story would take. She'd chosen those words on her own, months earlier, sitting somewhere I hadn't been, thinking about a Thanksgiving I hadn't witnessed. My mother's own hurt, dressed up as honesty, had been forecasted by an 81-year-old woman with a tin can and a lawyer 3 doors down from probate court, and had landed exactly where she predicted. The document my mother had filed to strip her own mother of her rights, the guardianship petition she'd used as a weapon, the paperwork in case she'd hidden from her own husband, was now Exhibit A in a courtroom filing that proved, on the record, exactly why Odile had needed protecting from her. The weapon she'd built to take the money had become the paper trail that gave it away for good. Rosalind closed the folder. "The land and the trust are already filed and recorded. There's nothing to contest. I told you all together because Odile specifically requested it. She wanted, and I'm quoting her instructions here, everybody in the room at the same time. So nobody gets to tell a different version to somebody who wasn't there." My mother left 3 days later a voicemail, which I still have, offering to let it go and move forward as a family, if I'd split the land value with her since it's really family money anyway. I let that message sit for a full day before I called her back. "I'm not doing that," I told her. "Not because I want to hurt you. Because you'd be asking me to undo the one thing she did entirely on her own terms. And I'm not willing to spend her last clear decision to buy your comfort. I meant it as mercy, actually. A door I was leaving open in case she ever wanted to walk through it as something other than a creditor." She hung up without answering, and that was the last time either of us tried. I sold nothing. I didn't need to. Desmond and I used a portion of the trust to buy out the lease on my shop building instead of renting it, and we put the rest into a fund neither of us has touched, because some money isn't meant for spending. It's meant for proving a point that's already been made. Chip and my mother divorced 14 months later, over what his sister later told a mutual cousin was money stuff mostly. Though nobody in that family has ever specified their grammar too carefully around me since. My mother lives in a smaller condo now, in Foley, and sends a Christmas card every year that I open and read all the way through, every single time, because closing a door isn't the same as slamming it. I kept the folding chair. It sits at the head of my own dining table now, cane bottom rewoven by a craftsman in Mobile for $85, oak frame refinished by my own hands on a Sunday in April, and every Thanksgiving since, it's the first seat filled, by whoever in the room needs most to know they were never actually in anybody's way. Desmond and I eat Pain Perdue most Tuesdays now, not every one, but most made from the same recipe, in the same order, cinnamon last. It doesn't taste like a performance of grief, and it never will. It just tastes like a Tuesday the way she said it should. Here's what I want you to take from this, and then I want you to actually do something about it before the day is over. Quiet people are not simple people. The ones your family calls sweet for tolerating a folding chair at the edge of the room are very often doing careful arithmetic in the background that nobody thought to ask about. So call the person in your family who gets the worst seat at the table. Today, not this weekend. Ask them one real question, and let them finish the whole answer. If this story mattered to you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments who you're calling today, and subscribe so the next one finds you when you need it. I'll see you in the next one.